Hi, I'm Chvala, former Senate Majority Leader.
And I'm Scott Jensen, former Assembly Speaker.
And we're the insiders. So Scott, the Legislative Audit Bureau, the nonpartisan Legislative Audit Bureau, completed its audit of the 2020 election as requested by the Republicans in the legislature. What's your take?
Well, I'm glad we finally had somebody who's kind of a beyond reproach that no one can say is a partisan hack or whatever. Take a look at the elections and the way we ran them here in Wisconsin. And I think we all learned something valuable here. It looks to me like the Wisconsin Elections Commission didn't follow the laws in many cases during the course of the elections. They gave bad advice to local clerks to not follow the laws. They didn't do things to clean up the list, to eliminate dead people, to eliminate felons, to eliminate people who moved out of state. The elections at the state level and the local level were run in inconsistent manners and sometimes in opposition to what the clear intent of the laws were. So I'm hoping this is a chance for people to at least clean up the elections. There's a lot of slop in these elections that we have around Wisconsin. Anyone who gets close to them, you see things that look inconsistent or sloppy at best. The notion that in one part of the state they're handling ballots one way and doing it in a different way in another part of the state, or that they're curing ballots one way in one part of the state and not in another, that 13% of all the ballot bags, no one actually got around to signing them, which is an important security matter, to sign the ballot bags when they're closed, so that someone knows if it's been open, the seal has been open. They didn't do that in 13% of the cases. So there's a lot of things here that suggest we really need to tighten up the way we run elections here in Wisconsin, make them consistent across the board. And I think that'll add fuel to the efforts by some Republicans to amend the state constitution, require uniform standards, uniform times, uniform administration elections across the state.
Well, what Scott has just said buries the lead. The lead was the Legislative Audit Bureau said there was not any substantial fraud and that the election was fair and clean, and people who voted legitimately and the election was fair. The way Scott has characterized this is the problem that we have in this country. By burying the lead and not acknowledging that we had a clean, fair election, and instead obfuscating with the minutia and detail that Scott talked about, you leave it open then for people who are less sophisticated or whose intentions are less honorable to question the validity of elections. And that's what's happening in our country. This is dangerous for what's going on. And for Scott to say that we need consistency, that is the hobgoblin of a small mind. Scott knows better. Scott's very bright. He knows that's not true. Do you believe it's fair for a city of 600,000 people to have one polling place? Because consistency would tell you if the town of Franklin is going to have one polling place, let's have one polling place in the 600,000 people. Let's not have ballot drop-off boxes in multiple locations. And of course, yet that is exactly what we want, because up until just a few years ago, when Republicans thought that not letting people vote would help them, we have always in this country, and particularly in the state, have always wanted the maximum number of people to vote and do everything we can to get people to vote. The Legislative Audit Bureau found some minutia, detailed type things that could be addressed. Yes, but the conclusion drawn should not be that there's going to be consistency across the board. What we have to do is make sure that we give the opportunity to vote more broadly to all people. And what we're consistently finding throughout the country, including the Republican Arizona audit, is that the elections are fair. And the only thing that we need to do is give more opportunity to people to vote, not less, which is what Republicans are trying to do. This, and you can probably sense the upset in my voice, because when I find someone as legitimate, as bright, and as talented as Scott, willing to go down the rabbit hole of immediately talking about the awful things and the things that need to be changed about our election, and all, it makes it sound like, and it gives people of lesser commitment to the process, the opportunity to say that this election is not legitimate. And it is. And that's the lead. And the lead should be, and the future should be, let's find more ways to make sure that people have an opportunity to vote with very little time. In my view, everyone should have to take no more than 10 minutes when they get to a polling place to be able to vote. Let's make sure everyone can vote. Let's make it as easy as possible. Let's have early voting. Let's have mail-in voting. My son lives in Montana. Because of mountains there, it would take him 45 minutes or more to get to the polls. He said some people it could take more than an hour because of the way the mountains work and private roads in between. Montana, for that reason, has mail-in voting. But yet Republicans and elsewhere in the country say, oh, that's a terrible thing. No, it's not. And the only standard is whether there is fraud in the individual vote of people. And the LAB audit, the Legislative Audit Bureau, the nonpartisan bureau said, hey, this was a fair election. There weren't thousands of people out there who were illegitimate voting. In fact, we found that with referrals around the state, there are less than 50 people who maybe voted illegally in the election. My God, you can't, it's amazing that we can have that clean an election. And Scott knows that. And that's the message we've got to get out there, or we really face the opportunity of losing our democracy. And that's how important it is, in my view.
Chuck, you're just crazy here. You're accusing me of something I did not do. I walked through the legitimate conclusions of the Audit Bureau. I didn't try to sensationalize the fact that 43 people voted twice in the election. I could have led with that. I didn't lead with that. I led with the things that were big numbers. I could have pointed out that there were 169,000 people who got an indefinite confinement designation, which allowed them to vote. But so those people are then supposed to come in later on and show us their voter ID. Yet more than 50,000 of those people have not showed up to validate that they're the person who voted in the last election. We let them vote on the condition that they come back later and show their ID, and they still haven't done that. So I didn't try to sensationalize this. I was trying to focus on the things that I think everybody on both sides of the aisle should be able to go, ooh, you mean that the WEC has not matched the list of voters? The Wisconsin Elections Commission has not matched the list of voters against known databases they're supposed to be using, in some cases since 2016. So here we are 5 years later. They still haven't gotten around to matching them against some of the lists of databases that they're supposed to be using to clean up the voter rolls. They're doing a bad job there. Here's one more question that I think I could have led with. Chuck, you and I served in the legislature for a long time together. Do you ever remember a state agency refusing to comply or cooperate with the Legislative Audit Bureau audit? But the Wisconsin Elections Commission chose not to. That's never happened before.
And that's because no one has ever questioned the sanctity of the election process. And they felt it was an illegitimate process, as I believe it was.
The Audit Bureau was illegitimate?
But John, Scott, let's take the biggest question you had there. You said there were 169,000 people. Ooh, were these illegitimate people voting?
Don't know.
These are people who claim that they were indefinitely confined. To have 50,000 of those people not get back, what a surprise. They're people in nursing homes or other locations. Of course, there are going to be more problems with that. The fundamental question is not that. It's not whether they check some box about providing something later, which they really shouldn't have to provide. The question is, was there somebody there who should not have voted, who voted? And they didn't. No, we do know, Scott. We know that's not true. But your legitimate point was, there are 43 people maybe who voted twice. If that is the case, what does that mean? That means that our elections are amazingly clean. Out of 3-some million votes cast.
I never made the allegation to say it's just that the election results were illegitimate. I didn't say the elections were not clean. I said they were sloppy. I said there was inconsistent administration at the state and the local level. And I think the Audit Bureau proved that point.
When you have 3.5 million people voting, and you have literally thousands of jurisdictions within which they vote, that we can find a couple of bags that weren't signed, that we can find that there were some people who didn't return a card, of course. But that really begs the question. What it does is it sends people off the rabbit hole. It sends somebody who's a January 6th type person saying, even Scott Jensen and Chuck Chvala are talking about the election and the problems. There were so many problems. Oh my God, there were big problems. No, the fundamental question is, were people allowed to vote? Did they vote? And were their votes counted accurately? And on that standard, the Legislative Audit Bureau said, thumbs up, Wisconsin did a great job. By the way, Scott, you and I both remember that Wisconsin used to be the top or one of the top 3 places in the country in terms of turnout. Instead of competing to try and make that better and make that more, we're now competing with how do we as Republicans keep more people from voting so that we can win elections? How can we make lines longer at polls? How can we and whatever we need to do to question somehow the process That will help us achieve our objectives. And that includes the election. You've seen the bills that the Republicans put forward to try and make it more difficult to vote. None of these things are needed. You know why? Because at the end of the day, your one vote doesn't mean a big difference in the election. But if you do it wrong and you get convicted of a felony, that's a big problem for you. That alone is a reason why nobody, except for a few idiots, are voting twice or voting, in some illegal way. And that's why across the entire country, all of the claims about bamboo ballots and all these different, none of that is coming to pass, because the people who actually administer elections, they actually do a good job, whether Republicans or Democrats. But this is a danger zone. Republicans across the country are setting it up so their legislatures will be able to overturn elections. If we get there, our democracy is lost. I mean, I cannot tell you the depth of the problem that we are contributing to by just even having this discussion when there's really no problem there.
Don't talk about the elections. That's the answer, I
No.
guess. So
No.
I for anybody out there who thought that the nonpartisan Legislative Audit Bureau, who's never had their results questioned before, would settle this debate in Wisconsin, I guess the answer is clearly no. The debate will continue.
And that is said. We'll see you next time.